Okay, good evening, everybody. Nice to see you as we begin our second series of Great Jewish Letters. This series, the three-part series, is going to focus on uh, three letters from Rav Kook, plus additional material as well, which are not letters. I think we will start. I do want to start by thanking Eidos for hosting this series and hosting the series we did, the first series we did on Great Jewish Letters, as well as hosting the series that we did on Haggadah before Pesach. Okay. I'm going to start with a brief biography of Rav Kook, so we can get to know him a little bit as soon as I could find it. Sorry about this. This is delay. Okay. A brief biography of Rabbi Abraham Isaac HaKohen Kook. Um, so he was born, Rav Kook was born in 1865 in the Jewish year 5625 on the 16th of Elul in Griva, Russia. And he died about 70 years later on the 3rd of Elul, 1935. Many people refer to Rav Kook as the first chief rabbi of the state of Israel, which is inaccurate because he died in 1935. He was a chief rabbi of Israel, of the land of Israel, Palestine, I guess, under the Ottomans, under the and then the British, but he was never chief rabbi of the modern state of Israel. Um, some suggest that we should sort of divide Rav Kook's adult life into four main periods. So the first would be the Lithuania period, where he served in the rabbinate in a town called Zaumel and then another town called Bausk before moving to Eretz Yisrael. This was between the years of 1888 and 1895. Actually, 1888 till 1904 when he made Aliyah. Then he made Aliyah in 1904, first to Yafo. Rav Kook arrived with the approval of the rabbis of Yerushalayim to serve as the chief rabbi of Yafo and the neighboring communities. That's how many of his letters from this period of time are signed, and his stamp said the rabbi of Yafo and the surrounding areas. And he was in that role for 10 years till the summer of 1914, when he left Eretz Yisrael to participate in the conference of the World Agudat Yisrael. May surprise you that Rav Kook was an Agudist, not known for their Zionism, but things were very different back then. And Rav Kook also doesn't fit into conventional frameworks, if you will. He was comfortable living in multiple camps. Unfortunately, while he was at the conference, World War I started, and he got stuck in Europe. And so during the war period, he was in Switzerland and England. He could not return to Eretz Israel. So first he settled in Switzerland, and then later he settled in London, where he served as a rabbi for 3 years, beginning in 1916. Then he made it back to Eretz Yisrael, and this is what you call the Yerushalayim period, where he was invited to serve as the chief rabbi of Yerushalayim in 1919. And then and 2 years later, he became the first chief rabbi of Eretz Yisrael. And he lived in Yerushalayim in a house in Han Street, which you could go visit still to this day. It's a house that bears his name, and it's a museum. Pardon? Been there, right? Right. And he died in 1935. So that's the basic contours of his life. So we have the Lithuania period, and then we have the Yafo period, and the war period, and then the Yerushalayim period, and the end of his life. Yeah, a son. His most famous child is a son, Rav Tzvi Yehudah Kook. and two daughters, I believe. Okay. In the first packet that you have, which we're calling the introduction to Rav Kook's letters, I wanted to review some of Rav Kook's writings just to get a sense of what he wrote. He was prolific. He wrote thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. It is said about Rav Kook that he wrote everything down and never really edited himself. So whatever he wrote is just there for people to discover and to publish or not to publish. Okay. Okay. So introduction to some of his writings. So Rav Kook wrote on halacha. He was a noted posek. And his responsa are called Mishpat Kohen. He also has sort of long form essays on specific topics. Famously, he wrote about Shemitah, and Rav Kook was an advocate of what we call the Heter Mechira, which is to sell land to non-Jews for the Shemitah year so that the land can continue to be cultivated. And that was actually an element of Rav Kook's life that caused him a lot of angst because a lot of other rabbis did not like that. He also wrote the Halacha Berura and Biur Halacha, where Rav Kook tried to connect practical halacha, normative halachic practice in juxtaposition with the sources in the Talmud Bavli, and you could buy the volumes. He also wrote essays on philosophy. He wrote articles on philosophy that were published in many journals. Of course, he wrote letters which deal with many philosophical topics, and we're going to see one of those tonight. And he wrote personal journal entries and collections. Those of late have been the most interesting in terms of, I say the most controversial, because until about 20 years ago, there were a number of these notebooks of Rav Kook that were unpublished. Rav Kook's editors were his son and Rav David Cohen, known as the Nazir, because he was a Nazir. And Rav Kook actually referred to them as his censors, because Rav Kook wanted to publish everything that he wrote, and his son and his main student, the Nazir, felt that some of his writings were too controversial, and therefore, here it's 2 packets each. So here's another 2. Did not want them published. But about 20 years ago, for example, on the internet, one of these unpublished set of notebooks just appeared on the internet. No one knows how that happened. And then since then, more and more of his originally unpublished works have come onto the scene. And we're going to see some of those tonight, and you may get a sense of why some of his students may have wanted them to be suppressed. That's personal journals. He also wrote poetry, and he also wrote a commentary, most notably a commentary on the Siddur. Yes?
Does that disappear mysteriously? Did they ever get mysteriously found again?
Pardon me?
No.
They didn't disappear. They just were never published, and now they've been published.
I thought you said they
mysteriously appeared on the internet. I said it appeared on the internet. Appeared, and we don't know how it got there. Someone does. Most people don't. I'm not on the inner circle, so I don't know either. We study Rav Kook's letters because a lot of Rav Kook's writing is very complicated. His language is very poetic, not necessarily modern Hebrew, but letters have a less formal style, and the language is easier to understand. So it's a great way to get introduced to Rav Kook's writings. Also, the letters offer us an insight into his personality, something you don't get when you're writing a book necessarily, but when you're writing a letter, you often have a different sense of the person. And the letters are practical. A lot of other writings of Rav Kook are more theoretical or conceptual, and letters are answering specific questions or sharing specific ideas that people ask Rav Kook about. And so it's a very practical way to study Rav Kook. Okay. A couple of other notes. Rav Kook's letters are found in a number of places. Igrot HaRe'iyah. This is volume 1. Maybe you've seen these around. There are 4 of such volumes. I was actually went down memory lane a little bit because I first started studying Rav Kook's letters when I was a student in my studying a year after high school. What's that? No, I was studying in Yeshivat Beit Midrash LaTorah, which doesn't exist anymore. But my Rebbe, Rav Benny Eisner, was a student of Rav Kook's son. And once a week, we would have a chabura in my Rebbe's house where we would study these letters. And these are my notes about each letter. And then I noticed that I had forgotten about this, that this set of 3 volumes that I have of Kook's letters must have been a gift from my Rebbe because he inscribed it, which has also brought back wonderful memories. He has since passed away. So, and some of the letters have my notes on them. You'll see some of them a little bit later. Okay, so there are various publications that have Rav Kook's letters. Rav Kook corresponded with the great rabbis of his time, with students, his son, and just regular people who wrote him letters. His address wasn't a secret. You could just write him letters, and there are literally thousands of his letters published for people to read. He wrote to Jewish leaders and politicians. He wrote to specific groups. We may see a letter tonight that he essentially sends out to all of the Jewish people because he's very upset about something that was said, and he addresses a letter to everyone. Okay, with that, let's jump in. Before we get to the actual letter we're going to study, let's jump into his son's introduction to the publication of the letter. So in the beginning of volume 1, his son, betwee Yehudah Kook, wrote quite a lengthy introduction, 5-6 pages, of Rav Kook's letters. We're just going to see 1 or 2 paragraphs, and that's on page 3 of the first packet you're in. The same packet that we're in now, it says Introduction to Igrot HaRe'iyah, Volume 1, written by betwee Yehudah Kook. It has a page 3 on the bottom. You don't need the photocopy of the letters yet. Right now, you're looking. There are some things which have luckily been translated into English, and so it makes it a little bit easier for us. Okay, so Rav betwee Yehudah Kook writes the following as an introduction to his father's letters. A letter, like the form of a face, the mannerisms of the body and limbs, and the form and style of handwriting, express both in its content and its style the very essence of its author. Right? Letters are different than a work on halacha or a tshuva or a book on shmita. That's you getting the person's intellect there. But here, when someone writes a letter to a friend or to an acquaintance or even to a stranger, you're getting something less formal, but more essential, maybe, of the person, as we know when we write letters, and serves to demonstrate and clarify his direction and his personality. The main attribute of a letter is that it possesses the inwardness of the individual's world, which Rav Kook, his son, calls the Reshut Hayachid, which we normally use in terms of Shabbos language, Reshut Hayachid, Reshut Harabim, private property, public property with an Erev, without an Erev. But the Reshut Hayachid he's using here sort of as a turn of phrase, the person's inner world, through its honest and naturally spiritual verbal expression, from man to man or even to several individuals. These individual relationships and their objects are also directed toward and correspond to the depths of the Reshut HaYachid in the spirit, which is disclosed through the expression. So, as we noted, betwee Yehudah Kook is saying, through these letters, you'll get to understand and know my father's personality in a different way than you would know who he is just from reading his formal writings. Now, this is also true, I think, about reading the private notebooks. I mentioned those private notebooks that just all of a sudden started appearing on the scene just 20 years ago or less. You also get insights into Rav Kook's inner thoughts because these were just jottings that he just wrote, which were not necessarily edited or necessarily even perhaps meant for publication. It's almost as if you would be carrying a notebook around and something wonderful happens to you. So you take out the notebook and you say, "You'll never believe what happened to me today." And maybe one day, after we're gone, our children will publish it. But it's going to be a very different type of thing than if we actually wrote a book about our life. Okay. So I have a question for you, a challenging question for you. These are letters that Rav Kook wrote to private individuals. What gave his son, Rav Tzvi Yehudah Kook, the right to publish all these letters? Now I'll tell you where we got the letters from, by the way. At some point, while Rav Kook was still in Europe, he began to write his letters on carbon paper. It's very interesting, right? I know when I write someone a letter, well, now when we write an email, everything's essentially saved. But when you write like someone a birthday card, you don't put carbon paper underneath the birthday card, so you could have a copy of what you wrote to the other person. Rav Kook, starting from very early in his career, essentially made a copy of each letter. So his son, Rav Yehudah Kook, had a stack of these letters and then decided to publish them in these volumes. So what gives him the right to do that? Like, these are private correspondences between Rav Kook and whoever.
Two things.
Okay.
Firstly, he censored some of them.
Rav Kook's son did censor some of them.
And secondly, the fact that Rav Kook wrote it down and kept it for the annals of the future suggested that Rav Kook was happy to have.
So you're suggesting that Rav Kook made copies because he wanted them published?
Potentially.
Okay. Yes.
It would seem that because he's a rabbi, he's giving opinions, feelings, whatever, as a rabbi to people. Generally, rabbis write tshuvas to questions that are raised to them, but he's committing himself to words.
Mm-hmm.
And he wants to record what he said, which is gives it an importance than a casual Happy Hanukkah letter.
Okay.
I mean, it's a rabbi
Right.
writing letters. People read the letters of a rabbi.
Okay, but Rav Tzvi Yehudah Kook says something similar, although, sorry?
Traditionally, followers, disciples of Rebbeim record whatever impressions they have.
But that's them recording their impressions. That's not them publishing private correspondence.
The impressions
right?
are published. If there are certain people from Tzfat, very important, the Arizal, he didn't write anything.
Right. So let me just stop you right there. It's true. Then when a rabbi is speaking, if a student wants to write down what the rabbi said and publish it, the rabbi's giving a public lecture. That's great. But a letter is not a public lecture by definition. It's addressed to a private person, into a person. I think it's an interesting question. The same goes to these pinkasim that have recently been revealed. Also, a question about what gives people the right to publish them. So I'll share with you a few things. In the introduction to the letters, Rav Tzvi Yehudah Kook writes that his father was such an overarching figure, that his father really belonged to the public. And almost like in a mystical sense, his father wasn't a private individual. His father was an individual whose the generation depended on him, the generation needed him, and therefore everything that he writes, and Rav Kook must have known this, of course, deserves to be disseminated. Yeah.
Several examples like this. The Lubavitcher Rebbe has entire books, letters.
Sure.
The Moshe Feinstein. Apparently, this is a custom by many great rabbis.
Right.
Great leaders,
Probably for the same reason.
for the same
Well, there are Moshe Feinstein's letters are tshuvot on halachic things, which there it's certainly. Yeah, that's true. That's true. I'll also note a few things that, first of all, Rav Kook, they say, wrote with a pencil. The alternative in Rav Kook's day was an ink, a pen that required constant filling with ink. And they say he wrote with a pencil because he didn't want to break his train of thought and having to stop writing when he was filling up, when he was dipping the pen back in the inkwell. As I said, he was just constantly writing. So he wrote with a pencil. Also, it's just to note that Rav Yehudah Kook explains in his introduction that Rav Kook, like I said, was an all-encompassing soul, and he lived his whole life on behalf of the Jewish people, and therefore everything belongs. Rav Kook didn't have the luxury of claiming to be a private individual, and before Rav Kook published one of his books called Orot HaKodesh, his students asked him if it should be published, and he said, I think everything should be published, but my censors, as I said before, his own son and the Nazir, Rav David Cohen, don't want to publish everything, talk to them. So it seems that Rav Kook even agreed that he wanted everything published, including the letters. Okay, so that's a little bit about Rav Kook's background, who he corresponded with, this question about whether it's even appropriate to be publishing and studying these letters. Now let's get to letter number 20, which is Rav Kook's letter on tolerance, which was written to a student of his, Moshe Seidel. Okay, very briefly, Moshe Seidel was born in a town in Lithuania called Kirkels. I don't know where that is exactly, in 1886, and he died in Yerushalayim in 1970. His Jewish education was from the Telz Yeshiva, and he studied with some serious Talmidei Chachamim, Rav Kook himself, Rav Elchanan Wasserman, and Rav Avraham Eliyahu Kaplan. He studied in Yeshiva, and then he studied in Germany, and he went on to become an expert in Tanakh and Hebrew. He actually lived in America for some time and taught at Yeshiva University for quite some time, for almost 20 years. He went back to Eretz Yisrael, and he was the administrator of the Mizrahi Women's Teachers Seminary in Yerushalayim. This is the person that Rav Kook is writing to, a very close student of Rav Kook. And what prompted this letter is fascinating. What prompted this letter is actually an issue connected to Eliezer Ben Yehudah, right? That name may be familiar to us. Eliezer Ben Yehudah, the father of modern Hebrew, right? Brought the Hebrew language back from the brink. And in a periodical called HaHashkafa, the Outlook, or the Philosophy, published in 1903, there was discussion about the Uganda proposal. Many of us know the Uganda proposal. The Jews need a place. Eretz Yisrael is too busy. There are too many, other people making a claim on it. It's too politically complicated. How about Uganda? So Eliezer Ben Yehudah was a Ugandist, right? He was in favor of Uganda because he was, in his mind, that was going to be best for the Jewish people and for his cause. He was one of the great proponents of the proposal, and it was again, it was a British colony, so it was potentially going to be able to be given by the British to the Jews. When explaining his support for the Uganda proposal, Eliezer Ben Yehudah wrote the following: "My interest in the land of Israel is not for its sake, for the sake of the land, but for their sake, the sake of the people." And he had no connection, despite the fact that this you don't have in your booklet, despite the fact that obviously Eretz Yisrael over the Torah. That wasn't interesting to him. What was interesting to him was that what was good for the people. So maybe it was good for the people. In the heat of this debate, with the other group was called the Sionei Zion, the Zionists, as opposed to the Ugandan Zionists, right? So Eliezer Ben Yehudah wrote as follows, and this you have on the bottom of page 4 in the first packet. He wrote, one other claim, the Zionists of Zion, right, the ones who want Israel, page 4 of the original packet, not the one with the letters, the original one that has the logo on top. He says, the Zionists of Zion claim about the Ugandidsts that they turned their backs on our entire past. There is much hypocrisy in this claim. Let us have no illusions. We have all turned our backs on our past, and this is our praise and our glory. That is Eliezer Ben Yehudah. Okay, that letter, by the way, is published in Hashkafa. Rav Kook's response to that letter is letter 18, which is not the one we're studying, but Rav Kook has quotes. He doesn't, by the way, quote Eliezer Ben Yehudah by name. He says that guy who said those things, but he does quote what he said, and he's very upset. Rav Kook is very upset because he feels that Eliezer Ben Yehudah went too far in claiming that all of the Jews have turned their back on the past. He felt that even the non-religious chalutzim who are building Eretz Yisrael and don't really care very much about Torah and don't care very much about tradition, they have not turned their back on tradition. By the very fact that they're building Eretz Yisrael is proof enough to that. And Rav Kook is very, very upset. And Rav Kook writes the following towards the end of the letter. I have a translation of Rav Kook's response on the top of page 5, where he says, Im ahavati lilmod v'lilamed, despite my love of learning and teaching, et yisodei hadeyot shalanu, the fundamentals of our thought, rachok ani milidrosh shilton al deotav shel eze ish sheyihiyah. Far be it from me to demand authority over anyone's opinions. Shehu biyamenu davar she'eno nishma, which nowadays is unacceptable. Right? I don't like what Eliezer Ben Yehudah said at all. I think he's all wrong, but I can't demand that anyone share my hashkafa and my opinion, because it's just unacceptable to do that nowadays. Okay, so let's talk about that. What do you make of that statement? Because the letter that we're going to study is because of this statement. So what is that? What do you think Rav Kook is saying? If you want to see it in English, on top of page 5 of the packet with great Jewish letters on top. Anyone want to take a stab at what you think Rav Kook is saying? Because his student understood it in a particular way, which led to the letter. Any takers? Okay, we'll go on then. Okay, so now, if you want to look at the letter, it's in English in the packet that we've been looking at, starting on page 5. The Hebrew letter is now in the other packet, and it's on page 1, 2, and 3. I think we're just going to read it in English for the sake of time, but feel free to go through the Hebrew if you'd like on your own. But this is, you could see, it's addressed on the top of the Hebrew to Dr. Seidel, as I gave you his brief bio. Okay, so his student is very upset with Rav Kook's response. Moshe Seidel is very upset with Rav Kook's response to Eliezer Ben Yehudah. In reference to my words in the open letter where I stated I do not seek to control anyone's opinions, you asked whether this is out of necessity or also the law of the Torah. This is a letter on tolerance. Moshe Seidel was wondering what Rav Kook meant when he said, "Far be it from me to demand authority over anyone's opinions." But that's followed by "nowadays is unacceptable." So does that mean that given the opportunity, that Rav Kook would demand authority over people's opinions about what they think? Or not? What did Rav Kook mean by "nowadays it is unacceptable"? So that's the question that this letter is trying to explain. So what we're going to do is we're going to see a few parts of Rav Kook's answer, and then we're going to see other writings of Rav Kook that complicate the landscape a little bit in terms of what Rav Kook said. Let's jump right in to the letter. Indeed, in my language, there is no ambiguity, since I stated, because in our time it is unacceptable. So it follows that had it been acceptable, such a requirement would have its place. The issue, however, requires great mountains of study to clarify its boundaries, and since it is impossible for me to write at length, I will write briefly and hope it will suffice for someone as discerning as you. So he's very fond of Dr. Seidel. He thinks he's a smart guy, and Rav Kook is not going to spell everything out in the hope that Dr. Seidel could figure it a little bit on his own. So this is really interesting because at first, Rav Kook seems to say there's no ambiguity. I wrote, in our times, it's unacceptable. But then he writes, however, the issue requires great mountains of study to clarify its boundaries. Right? So already in the first paragraph of Rav Kook's answers, it's unclear, I think, what Rav Kook means when he talks about tolerating thoughts and beliefs that are different than his own, or in Rav Kook's mind, go against the Torah. You should know that common sense is always a very important principle in law, be it applied law or legal theory. We therefore always have to reach the core of the truth. And when we see a truth contradicting another truth, there then must be a determining factor, and this will be the place for new study. Thus we will see how far the limits of freedom of thought, considered the basic truth by most enlightened men in the world today, extend according to reason. So he's going to explain now, Rav Kook, his opinion of freedom of thought. This is not freedom of speech, which is in the news all the time here in America recently. This is freedom of thought, right, which is even harder to pin down. Perhaps you say it has no bounds, right? Maybe you'll say that you could think anything you want. That, however, cannot be said. For one, because we do not have even one virtue in the world which extremism will not harm. So what's his claim here about freedom of thought? Why it can't have no bounds. What's his first argument?
It would be harmful.
It would be what?
Harmful.
Harmful. Right. In what way could it be harmful?
I don't know.
Okay. But that's what Rav Kook says, right? And Rav Kook here is echoing the Rambam's view of we'll always be in the middle, right? Never have an extreme. Neither extreme is good. We should always be the Shvil HaZahav. We should always be in the middle. And so the same would go with thought, right? We shouldn't have extreme thought. And we're going to see what Rav Kook is going to unpack this. So he first makes this sort of general claim, and then he unpacks it a little bit. Furthermore, the nature of the matter requires that there be a limit to freedom of thought. For if there is no such limit, every person would cast away all obligations of accepted morality until he reaches in his own mind an understanding of what he stands for. And then the earth would be filled with corruption. A total separation between opinions and deeds is impossible because actions, to a small or large extent, necessarily stem from opinions. So an extreme opinion could be dangerous, not because the opinion itself is dangerous, but opinions lead to actions. People act on their opinions. And so we have to be very careful not to allow any opinion to necessarily thrive, because that opinion could lead to harm. And he gives an example. For instance, for a person to accept at heart that there is nothing wrong in murder is definitely a sin. For if this acceptance flourishes, the existence of the world would be destroyed. And the same is true for other examples. Thus, we learn that there is a limit to freedom of opinion, but the difficult issue is to determine this limit. So Rav Kook right away recognizes that sometimes we have to limit thought, but it's hard to know when, right? It's hard to know when. Now, this is not necessarily what Rav Kook said in that first paragraph. In the first paragraph, he seems to have said, well, the reason we can't limit thought is because it's not acceptable to do that these days. And here Rav Kook is saying, well, the reason we can't limit thought is because who's to say that I know the truth better than somebody else? So we're seeing that it's complicated, this notion of tolerance for Rav Kook, because even though he has what he believes are correct opinions and beliefs, he's also, it sounds like, willing to admit that he may be wrong. His opinion of his opinion, right? That he may be wrong. So that's like an important admission in this letter. Okay, let's read a couple of other of his arguments. It follows that the limit is not identical in every society. This is another very, very important point he makes. For example, the full consensus that there is no harm in walking naked in the streets for one who consents to this and calls for people to actually behave in this manner is a sin in our society, and deservedly so. But this would not be a sin among the savages on the island of Guinea, for example. I don't know why he picked that island, but maybe he has a postcard on his refrigerator from a student. Who knows?
New Guinea.
Well, he writes the islands of Guinea. I don't know, for example, as there are necessarily differences between societies. So that's another thing he's admitting, right? He'd like to maybe say that there's a truth, but maybe that's not the case, right? Because different societies allow for different things, and as long as it's not harming anybody, who's to say?
What does that mean, not helping?
That's a good question too. That's a good question too. But
so it is endless. So when you say that there is a freedom, the only freedom that you can have is of people that able to take more responsibility. Freedom it means more responsibility, not
Okay.
less responsibility.
so what you write,
And what people understand today, freedom is no responsibility.
so what Rav Kook is saying,
That is exactly the opposite of freedom.
right?
Because slave doesn't need to worry about anything.
Correct. But what Rav Kook is saying here is that a true opinion or idea may depend on the context of, in this case, of where you live and the society that you live in. So adding yet another complication to Rav Kook's claim at the beginning, or in the letter in response to Eliezer Ben Yehudah, that the only reason he is not able to control what people think is because it's not acceptable. Now it's not only that because it's not acceptable, it's because there may be multiple beliefs. In one society, one thing is okay, and another society, another thing is okay. Now, this may come as a surprise to some of us coming from someone like Rav Kook, but that's what he seems to be writing. So he has a specific claim that on one level we have to control action because action control thought, because thought leads to action. On another level, we have to recognize that it's not so easy to determine exactly what the truth and what the right thing is. That is a sort of like a pluralistic way to look at ideas, right? As opposed to saying I'm the only one who's right and everyone else is wrong. Rav Kook seems to be saying, leaving room for something other than that. Now Rav Kook turns his attention to the Jewish people. He says all of this is very good, but with regard to religion, we're on page 6 in the middle of the top paragraph. With regard to religion, there is a marked distinction in this matter between Israel and the rest of the world, where there is a nation in the world whose main being and continued existence as a nation were dependent on a particular idea, then it would be completely legitimate and even obligatory that with regard to that idea, there'd be no freedom of thought within the nation. Right? And maybe you'll see where Rav Kook is going with this. Right? If there's a nation whose entire existence depends on one idea, then it's illegitimate to reject that idea. Why? It would be it for that nation, right? If that idea loses its power, then the whole nation is going to fall apart, right? It would be completely legitimate and even obligatory that with regard to that idea, there be no freedom of thought within that nation. For that would not be freedom, but laziness in defending itself due to the nervous tendency of a few people. And then he goes on in the bottom paragraph, there is no other nation in the world whose acknowledgement of the name of God, blessed be he, as the Lord of the universe, keeper of the covenant, loving kindness, and all ways of righteousness, which are attributes of the Holy One, blessed be he, is the basis of its national life and the unique condition of its restoration to its land and the establishment of its rule. So Rav Kook is saying here that the entire existence of the Jewish people and their ability to restore themselves in Eretz Yisrael is completely dependent on belief in God. So therefore, if one does not believe in God, well, that we can't have that. We have to protest against that. Because in Rav Kook's mind, that is going to lead to the destruction or the end of the Jewish people. Therefore, he writes, whoever undermines through thought and all the more so through deed, the idea which vitalizes the nation is a traitor to the nation, and his pardon is folly. So now we're back to a more extreme sort of understanding of thought of Rav Kook's thought, a more extreme understanding of how Rav Kook sees tolerance. He's willing to be very tolerant of lots of things and accept that he may not have the full truth, except when it's going to perhaps lead to the destruction. Now, the only belief, this is very important to note, right? The only belief that Rav Kook feels is key and fundamental to the continued existence of the Jewish people and their restoration in the land is belief in God. Nothing else. Shabbos, kashrut, none of the other mitzvot are required, let's say, in order for the Jewish people to exist. It's just what he calls acknowledgement of the name of God, etc.
Previously, he was defending the Filoni.
So it felt that way, and it could be that he's doing that here too, with the simple exception, or not simple, the important exception of belief in God, right? So on one level, you could say this is harsh, right? If the person doesn't believe in God, Rav Kook feels that that person is a destroyer of the people. On the other hand, he's saying, yeah, all the chilonim, all the secular chalutzim and the ones who are building the land and are not shomer mitzvot and are anti-religion, well, their main problem is the belief in God. All the other stuff we could live with, right? So it almost sounds like he wants to have his cake and eat it too. Now we're going to see some other passages where Rav Kook says some very interesting things about this group of people who are building the land of Israel. Let's just finish off the letter and go to page 7. Rav Kook basically says that it's true what I say, that the belief in God is essential, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because nowadays we can't do it even if we would want to. So if you look at page 7, in the middle paragraph, he explains to Moshe Seidel that in order in our day and age, for various reasons, we'll see what those various reasons are. We can't control this. In order for us to realize national sovereignty, it is necessary that the power of the nation reach complete perfection. But in the meantime, to avoid national rule totally is also impossible, because the spiritual character of the nation is, blessed be God, always alive, right? David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam. Hence, this is the counsel of the Lord, who is wonderful in counsel and great in wisdom, that the nation's capacity to control opinion diminishes to the same extent that the nation's spiritual powers weaken, and that this inability to control opinion is a sign of God's will. So the fact that there are all these people out there who don't believe in God, it's bad, but there's nothing we can do about it, because this is obviously what God wants right now. God's not ready for us to reach national and complete perfection for whatever reason. If God was ready for that, then maybe he would make it so that people would believe in God. But since that's not happening,
Was that why he's not debating Ben Yehudah?
that's why he wrote in the letter about Ben Yehudah that despite my desire to teach the fundamentals of faith, it's unacceptable nowadays.
It's unacceptable, but that doesn't make any sense. Like, that statement makes no sense.
Which statement?
Like, that sentence makes no sense coming from Rav Kook, unless he thought
Oh, okay. Unless he thought that.
this perspective that there's no point because of where everyone is spiritually.
And it's God's will. Right.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes. So the question, so
Until you got here, I have to be honest, I had no idea what was playing.
okay,
Like,
well,
I thought the rest of it didn't make sense. To explain the.
okay. Well, I'm glad it makes sense now. So his point is, when he says it's unacceptable, now it sounds more like, well, this is God's will. And sometimes it's God's will that things don't shake out the way we would want them to be. And then he goes on to more practical explanations. He says there are many ways to do this. Sometimes it is a practical obstacle, such as the fear of the state. He's talking about in this point, I think he's talking about the Ottomans, right? That we can't be the thought police, because the people who are in charge aren't going to allow us to be the thought police, and so forth. Sometimes it is a spiritual obstacle, such as the obligation not to say things which are unacceptable. He's quoting a Gemara where that says, just as it's a mitzvah to tell people things that they're going to listen to, it's also a mitzvah not to tell people things they're not going to listen to. Right? There's no point in that. It may actually make it worse if now they know it's wrong and they're not going to stop doing it anyway. So maybe it's better not to say it. So whether it's sort of this mystical, this is God's desire, or practical because of the state, or practical because of halacha, we have to live in a society right now, says Rav Kook, in Eretz Yisrael, where even though this belief is conceptually destructive and corrosive to the Jewish people, we have to live with it because this is God's will, and also there are practical reasons. So it's not just that if we could, we would. It's a bigger theological picture going on here that Rav Kook is responding to when he writes the letter to his student in response to what his student had read in Rav Kook's letter to about Eliezer Ben Yehudah. So, in the few minutes that we have left, I want to show you some other things that Rav Kook wrote about this generation of chalutzim, non-observant, maybe anti-religious, and what he thought about them, because it adds color to this letter as well. So let's look at page 9. And here, this is from some of these notebooks that appeared in the last, let's say, 20 years or so, that were suppressed for a very, very long time, and then started to get published. And I will, we could read the English, because it's available in English on the bottom of page 9. There are certain righteous individuals who feel a deep inner. Actually, we're going to skip a little bit because I want to save a little time. Rav Kook is talking about great tzaddikim, and I think no doubt here he's talking about himself. Okay? And he writes the following on the top of page 10. As such tzaddikim, foundations of the world and exalted sages, even when circumstances arise that prevent them from fully actualizing the longing of their hearts for the revelation of holiness and supreme attachment to God, or even when their desire to don tefillin all day is thwarted by various obstacles, nonetheless, the inner yearning within their souls for the light of the tefillin radiates profoundly in the world. We'll get clarity in a few minutes about why the tefillin are important. Through them, a light of loving kindness spreads across creation, increasing mercy, forgiveness, and great compassion. So there are great tzaddikim who are also full of loving kindness and mercy and forgiveness. These are the true lovers of Israel, whose souls thirst for God's salvation and for the rebuilding of the land of Israel. They incline always towards kindness, finding merit in everyone, even in the most severe transgressors, the heretics and provocateurs. Remember, the heretics are the ones he's talking about in the letter that we read. But the great sages find kindness and merit for these people. For in the purity of their souls, they perceive the hidden spark of goodness within every soul, right? The great tzaddikim can discern holiness in the souls of the heretics, all the more so within the souls of Israel, and especially in those who identify with love for the nation as a whole. Such individuals lean toward goodness and justice, and their merits are immense. So here is Rav Kook writing about these irreligious chalutzim, who nevertheless have a love for the nation because they're trying to build up the land of Israel. And Rav Kook says their merits are immense. And the essence of this natural God cleaving, this is the inner sanctity of the tefillin themselves, is precisely the love of Israel. And that's going to explain what this has to do with tefillin. For these are the tefillin of the master of the universe. Here he's referencing a Gemara that says God also wears tefillin. And in our tefillin, we praise God, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And in God's tefillin, he praises us. Who is like your people, Israel, a unique nation upon the earth? So when he talks about the desire of these tzaddikim to wear tefillin, he's talking about the connection between our tefillin and God's tefillin. And God's tefillin is a praise of the Jewish people. So these great tzaddikim who have the desire to always wear tefillin, really they're tapping into God's love of all the people, which manifests itself in the great tzaddik's love for all of these non-religious, irreligious, anti-religious people who are building up the land of Israel. So here's a whole nother level of, if you want to call it, tolerance that we didn't see in the letter. Right? The letter was more practical, or God's will. And it could be that maybe this is what Rav Kook means about God's will, right? That God's will is that we try to, in some way, emulate these great tzaddikim who have this incredible love for God, so that we will see the righteousness in what they are doing, as well. And there are other passages in these later notebooks of Rav Kook where he calls the chalutzim, believe it or not, tzaddikim gimurim. Right? A tzaddik gamor, a complete, perfect tzaddik. And these are people, again, who hold opinions which really violate almost everything that Rav Kook believes in, but nevertheless, he calls them tzaddikim gimurim because he's one of these tzaddikim who feels he's able to sort of tap in to their love of the land of Israel, and he writes the people of Israel and the language of Israel. Their desire to rebuild all of those things puts them in the category of tzaddikim gimurim. So it's not so clear that when Rav Kook wrote in the letter in response to Ben Yehudah that I will get his exact language one more time, that nowadays it's unacceptable, that it was just a practical thing. It's far from a practical thing. Nowadays it's unacceptable could mean nowadays we have to look at people differently. Right? We have these people who, from the outside, they look in Rav Kook's world terrible. But in Rav Kook's inner world, they're tzaddikim gimurim. Maybe that's what it means that nowadays it's unacceptable. It doesn't only mean that we can't have the thought police because the Turks aren't going to like it. It could mean something much more theologically powerful than that. So this leaves us perhaps understanding that Rav Kook's view of these things was actually quite complex and complicated. That on the one hand, he felt that there could be beliefs that could undermine the future existence of the Jewish people, but nevertheless see in those same people great righteousness. And we see the push and pull in Rav Kook's own writings between those two poles, and realize then that perhaps it's very hard to precisely pin down where Rav Kook landed on these things, and some writings are more harsh, and he says and some writings are much more charitable towards these people. So that's a little bit on Rav Kook on tolerance. We have two more letters that we're going to study, and I think we have class next week, but we don't have class on the 21st, and then we have class again on the 28th. Right, 21st is the Hillel dinner, I think. Okay, thank you for coming, everyone, and have a lovely, lovely rest of your night.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Galman.
Thank you.
If the Jews went to Israel, then there wouldn't be those righteous. Rabbi Kook wouldn't have felt they were so righteous and religious.
If what?
If they moved to
Uganda.
then there was no love of the land.
No love of them, but still love of the people and love of the language. He got 2 out of 3.
You need all three.
Right? Maybe, yeah.
In the long run,
Yeah.
he had love for Ben Yehudah. Once we got past the Uganda issue, because Ben Yehudah is another one.
Yeah.
Malutzi, finding the Hebrew language.
Yes.
I assume Ben
Right.
Yehudah ended up living in Eretz Israel.
He did indeed. Although if you read letter 18, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of love lost between Rav Kook and Ben Yehudah. Yeah. But you're right. If we apply the paradigm that we just explained, it seems that you'd be right. Yeah. All right. Good night, everybody. Yasher koach. I know it's a late night, 8 o'clock. It's late. It's hard to keep my eyes open. Just trying to.
Okay, I got it. This man had a lot of zits playing. The zeal of generation.
Here, listen to what Cook writes. He says, all these secular people, Mikol Makom, Haim Mileim Rigshe Kodesh. Nevertheless, they're full of holy feelings. Shehem Mitmal'im B'Pnimiotam Al Yedei Ahava L'Klal Yisrael, that fill their essence because of their love of all the Jewish people, Eretz Yisrael, Ulashon HaKodesh. The Chol Inyan Human, every matter regarding the nation. The Kol Mashem Medabrim Be'eza Inyanam B'Tam Levam, and when they just speak without pretext, then what they're saying is like it's better than any tefillah that anyone could ever offer. Wow. It's so beautiful. Thank you. All righty. Sei gesund, everyone.
They were arch secularists
Yeah,
in the Zionist movement, which didn't make Rav Kook's life any easier.
right. That's true. Yep.
He could deal with the fun, but the outspoken people's children of the Hatzlacha must kill
Maskilin,
him
right.
like Ben Yehudah. Uh, it's a whole other ballgame.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Anyway, fascinating.
Okay, Shkoyach, thank you for your comments. And I'm gonna put this chair back over here.
The silver tone things. There we go.
All right, Lila Tov, everyone.
Wasn't last week's art show all about Soros?
Service.
Sorry for your service.
Don't forget service. Yeah, yeah. So Mort, you saw, maybe you saw the email, homelessness. So we'll all be over like 9:30 on Shabbos. Oh, you guys won the lottery, you get to host the first 1,000. We're picking names out of the hat now. I can't confirm or deny that rumor until you'll get a letter from BMH. Are you on their emailing list? No.
It's not actually gone.
They are sending out a note about their new program on the 13th, which is going to explain. It's going to answer all of your questions.
Rabbi Hai,
Whose email? Their
The
email?
email was very circumspect. I think would be the purpose.
Circumspect of what?
Of like, there was clear underlying, like, a bunch of stuff that wasn't said in the
Yes, yes.
namely the last paragraph that said, no, we still plan on working on coming back.
We are. We're still, we're trying to negotiate with them.
what are they?
They kicked us out, but we're still planning,
oh,
We're trying. We are
What do
trying.
they do with that building? Like,
That's a great question.
they said they need the whole.
They need all the space.
Are they kicking
Oh my God,
Rabbi,
what is this?
Well,
But no,
you
she
know,
wrote in there.
I cannot say. I cannot answer that question without violating confidence.
What is the connection of Nahle with BMX?
They would rent there.
Is Nahle a legal entity, at least of sorts, which is paying rental, and participants in Nahle are paying some kind of donation fees, you
I
know?
would imagine that they paid to rent the space on the holidays.
Yeah.
I was looking at it.
Right.
What's that?
I've got no idea because,
They're only there, they're only in BMH on the High Island.
right,
Otherwise, they're at,
Great.
Rodin.
oh, that minion activity
Once a month.
somewhere else.
Once a month ago. Yeah, so we're gonna have branches. We're gonna have the Hilltop branch. The Winston Down branch. We're gonna have a Lowry branch. Oh, hopefully it'll all work out. Did you find Vinoch, did we find houses in Vinoch Roots?
Right now, they're like gonna stay in my house, which is not the idea.
Which group? The DJDS group or the DOT group?
Well, that's. Basically, I found out about this like a week ago. If somebody had informed me like a few months ago, then this would be a lot easier. But now they're like in this desperate strait, and so God said no to.
What do you mean?
Like God said no for the dot ones to go there. She can't house DJDS because she's supervising them.
He offered to host, and they said no on ground. No, she's not. She
She can't have DJDS the dot.
right. Why did she say no? Why did they say no?
Because that's how this community rolls. And like 30 people said no because of. I'm exaggerating, but 30 people said no.
I know people said no. I asked some people too.
Like there's no yichud. That's not even like a real.
It is. It could be good, but just don't do it.
What do you mean? Like your door's gonna be open, the person's gonna be in.
It's only yichud if the husband's home alone with the women.
No,
the
not just
girls.
that, doesn't also the white can't be able to come in at any time or whatever? It doesn't just mean alone in the house,
Right, I don't understand.
that's what, I mean.
My understanding of yichud is if the wife is out of
They're
town.
out of town, and they
That's a
can't
problem.
get there, blah, blah,
Right.
blah.
And they see somewhere else for the
There are a
weekend.
bunch of people that said you could,
No one's PPK.
I don't know,
We're not that from.
I don't know. Some people have there, like if you need boys at home,
Right, but by the way, the people in Israel won't allow them to stay with you.
oh, well, then they can't stay in my house.
We shouldn't,
Well,
they find out that they have their own bathroom in your house,
yes,
like a basement thing, or?
yes.
That's different. More acceptable.
And these guys have a 25-year-old.
Yeah, I told you, yeah.
I mean, there were like 100% legitimate, but like, the thing is that, yeah, I think breaking up 2 or 3 months would be relatively easy, but the question started out for the whole year. Not,
I may be wrong, but I don't know if God got permission from the Benot Shirut, I forget what it's called.
Lady.
That they could do it. for free.
every other community does that.
Yeah, that was not my experience in Houston. My experience was
One
6
family.
months or a year.
I think, yeah. Whatever, this was the house you probably have. I don't know.
Thank you.
I mean, allowed it,
And the Benot Shirut were doing a couple months at a rental.
right?
They all had an apartment.
That does, yeah. I didn't think that was allowed, but that's.
I
that's
agree
great.
with you that it's all that, but if you do 3 months, that's not,
It's
crazy.
doable, right?
so I think it'll work out, but I just got involved like. 2 weeks ago. And no, there, right now, there's, no, we don't. Now we're looking at renting. And like,
You did the,
they used.
and Dot put their money together and got a 2-bedroom apartment at the Lex.
Dot doesn't have any money
for
at all.
4
so I
girls, that'd be great.
That when they.
Yeah.
came here and
Yes, I
got-
remember that. Yes, when they were at Dot. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
They didn't get along, so then the one ended up saying they.
I don't remember them getting along. Well, when I moved here, they were living in an apartment. Does
Which
Edo
do
still
they-
have that
which-
apartment? Does
Oh,
Edo
the
still
big
have, that?
apartment.
No?
Really,
Big
big
apartment.
place?
No.
Was it a big car Poland? I thought it was just an apartment or what?
Oh.
I spoke to someone today that has a basement apartment that would do $17.50 a month. But it would only fit his max.
Is this the, who is this? Is this the one where Furman stayed?
I don't know. Yeah, Jackie. What's the-
Yeah.
Different there.
Yeah, he thinks it's barely, it was barely big enough for him. He doesn't think, I asked him, he doesn't. You guys are back?
Well, I guess. Well, Raina is really a bunch of people that I don't think about.
There's a spreadsheet.
Good, Marty.
Okay.
Okay.
Share.
How is it going, guys?
I'm inspired to share the spreadsheet with you.
Oh,
We'll go through it.
I know that he has-
Yeah. Yeah. Not your face. Sorry, right? You were there in the middle of the year.
No,
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, they're, and it's kind of embarrassing.
You were there like around January.
This is a big ass.
Yeah.
It's a big ass.
I'm gonna show them.
But I was
like,
that's what I do.
They're a little kid.
No, we haven't, we were in the hotel.
Yeah, I don't think people ask the baby. Because I've been on that.
Also, baby cameras don't have room.
That's what we're.
I thought you should ask people like the threesome. Because
Yeah, I
Layla and Ruby are leaving.
But
That's the bridge, right? Past the bridge.
I think they said no. I think, I don't know if she, I know Cheryl was thinking, she had gone.
But when you have babies, your bedrooms are full.
I don't know, I was lucky enough to live in my house, like,
We saw that.
here, so I had plenty of babies there while I was living in the house, but, we can get them a car,
Yeah, they have the car this year.
but that car is going to Ellie, so. Usually in the past with the cars are not a big deal, because you know, extra. The other thing is a lot of people are going to Israel, like, them a lot of time. I was texting market people. Brian, do you know the brands well? You know Ted? Still a lot, like most of the year, a lot of. Does their son live in their house when they're not home? Do you, would you feel comfortable texting us about this situation? Or sending me the number? There are three, I think Andy cards also.
Grandson of it.
Yeah, their house is.
I don't know what, the house is empty or they've got a tenant.
Do they become?
United everyone. Some people, they won't allow it as a classroom.
No, I don't know. I think he told me she's strictly kosher
It's a black box.
because she goes sorority. So I said she's not. A Yeah,
Who's calling?
I understand if it's a kosher.
Who's calling?
I mean, I don't know. It would be total hearsay, like terrible left or I'd be literally making it up. Like I have a
No, but you're saying
suspicion.
that's your suspicion.
No, Mark told me, he suggested it. She didn't know, and then Mark said to me, somebody told him that the mother has to be Orthodox. So because she was sorority, they don't consider her Orthodox. I mean, it would also be a caution thing, but then you guess, like, you could have like a sex and cancer thing. You go through their, yeah, just to ask them. What's it, like, why do we have services?
You assume, I assume.
You can check what's in our situation. We've got space,
Okay, I'll ask her.
but they would
You're
need,
kind of far, but I will,
that's why I was asking about a car.
yeah, you guys are very nice like that. Thanks, Bryce.
Hi, Brian. Hi, Serena.
I disagree with you because I think you're just like, I don't think it's some people don't.
I assume.
When if Hagi tells me she's kosher, I believe it. But if she hadn't told me, I wouldn't. Only because I know that she knows. Like, I love her.
You want to look close? All right, good night.